just has seemed to really embrace the physicality of his routes and getting those extra yards. Does that give you a little bit of an enjoyment to see him kind of truck sticking people out there?
It's funny to hear a female talk about routes. Like, it's funny. But fun is coming along, man. We're gonna. This is a big game for him.
Well, there you have it. Instead of starting the show talking about the Diamondbacks win or the Minnesota Lynx, we're going to start with Cam Newton. And Robin, obviously, I have defended Cam Newton a lot in the past, everything from stealing the laptop at Florida. I said he's young and maybe we should be paying players anyway. Maybe they wouldn't have to steal laptops if they were getting paid. I defended him when his father allegedly took money from Mississippi State for Cam to sign a letter of intent. I said the sins of the father can't be the sins of the son. I defended him after the Super Bowl when he acted like a petulant child and left the podium and not speaking to reporters after the game or only speaking for a few minutes. And I'm just not going to defend Cam Newton anymore because he is way too famous. He is way too much in the spotlight to not understand what kind of reaction his comments were going to get. It's almost like he went out of his way to make a dismissive and sexist comment to a female reporter when he had absolutely no business doing that. And it doesn't even matter what the question was. He has absolutely no business doing that. Women shouldn't have to defend themselves on how much they know sports, which I feel bad that a lot of my colleagues have to do that today. I don't think, though, that said, Cam didn't set women who cover sports back. He didn't set football players back. We're not going to paint with a broad brush here, but he set himself back a lot with this comment. And, I have a personal experience where I interviewed Cam Newton in 2014. And I went back to that interview because I remember how I felt leaving the interview. And one of the biggest takeaways was that until we got on camera and the camera started rolling, Cam wouldn't look me in the eye. I tried to foster a little bit of a connection, telling him I had been to Auburn twice and I'd interviewed his coaches there. I was on the field when he won the national championship and tried to establish some kind of rapport. He just really didn't want it. He was really apathetic about it. And it's clear he didn't want to be doing the interview, even though he was hawking a cologne at the time. But I asked him in that interview to give advice to the new crop of quarterbacks who were coming out of the draft, knowing how much the responsibility was on his shoulders, not just football, but everything else. And he said his advice was always be a student, always be learning, and to realize that as the quarterback, you always have the spotlight on you. And listening to that now, 3 years later, I feel like Cam has not followed his own advice.
Well, that's the kind of answer that makes me think it was a coached response at this point. I find his comments disappointing because there's been a lot of what he's done in front of the press and things he said that I've kind of been, what are you talking about, dude? This one made me cringe, like physically cringe, because of, it's not even the content. I mean, the content is terrible, but the dismissiveness, as you mentioned, it's not a verbal flub here. This is what he meant. At least it comes across as what he meant. And it's disappointing because I've also, I defended Cam. I think Cam Newton's an awesome player. I think Cam Newton has been the recipient of unfair, sometimes coded criticism. But this, you can't say that. I mean, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And I don't have to sit here and defend women who cover sports. I mean, nobody I've worked with prepares as hard as you do, but I don't think that needs to happen. I think, we can talk about Cam Newton and what he said without calling him the worst person who ever lived or anything like that, and just be frank that those comments are unacceptable.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of people are just sort of shocked, like, how could this happen in 2017? I feel like that has actually been a common theme that we've seen over and over again, whether it is sexism, whether it is racism, whether it is any of these outright things. And, I think that using these moments as real, like, learning tools, like teaching people, I hope that Cam Newton isn't beyond, the point of being able to see why he's getting such a negative reaction to this and why he's going to be criticized so much for it.
Well, yeah, and, as far as being shocked by this stuff in the context of the era and times we're living in, I'm not really shocked by a lot of things, but when he makes those comments, the apology that is sure to come is going to feel manufactured.
Hollow.
If he had come out right afterwards and said, look, I'm sorry, I know that came across terribly, I really apologize, then I think this crisis, if you will, would have been averted. But given the time that's passed, and again, given the condescending tone, it's going to be hard to look past. In better news regarding women in sports, the WNBA Finals featured an exciting, tightly contested Game 5 with the Minnesota Lynx topping the LA Sparks 85-76 to win the title. The Lynx staved off elimination twice in the series to win a 4th championship in 7 years. Maggie, do you think they belong in the conversation with other modern dynasties?
Yes, they absolutely do. I mean, 4 and 7, but they've also been to the finals 6 out of 7. And even though they've lost a couple of them, just getting back to the finals, I mean, we talk about it with LeBron James. Just, I mean, getting there is also incredible. To win 4 and 7, I think, is unbelievable. And they also have a winning percentage like over 70% over this last 7 years, which is just really dynamite. You know, I really think that this is also going to help the WNBA. We forget the WNBA, it's in its 21st season. I mean, that's an infancy compared to the NBA and into NFL and stuff like that. So when you have these two teams that create this amazing rivalry, it kind of harkens a little bit back to me like a little with Magic and Larry. I mean, that's one thing that really set the NBA onto a different course and different trajectory. And I love the fact that you have these, you know, household names who are on these teams. They're Olympians. I mean, they are champions. They were incredible college players. We know these women. And so the fact that they have now met in the finals 2 years, they've been epic. 2 Game 5s going the distance in both series, I think sets up maybe for even another year, a three-peat. I mean, how excited are people when the Cavaliers and Warriors, you know, get a rematch? I think this is on par with that. And you just had to see that Game 5 last night to just know at what a high level these women are playing at.
I think it's just cool they're being recognized, right? Maya Moore for her individual accomplishments. And the WNBA, I saw on social media a lot more discussion of it than I have in the past. Now, that's my timeline, but it did seem to generate more interest and buzz. And I also think it's cool how much love the NBA guys show to the WNBA players, respect for the game and for the craft and for what they're doing out there on the court. It's been a season where it doesn't feel like all the Steelers are on the same page, and now 2 of their top players definitely aren't. Ben Roethlisberger criticized Antonio Brown's display of frustration on the sideline after Brown thought Roethlisberger missed him open, calling it, quote, unfortunate, and saying that goes a lot further than throwing a temper tantrum. They are 3-1, but do you sense a rift in Pittsburgh?
Kind of, and I feel like I don't want to go back too far, but people are going to go back to Antonio Brown in the Facebook Live from the locker room a year ago, and I'm not going to draw a direct line there, but it just seems like there is kind of one thing after the next, and especially with Antonio Brown, you know, one thing that didn't get a lot of coverage that I thought was really, really eye-opening from the preseason and from training camp was him calling out Le'Veon Bell on Twitter. I mean, that's one thing that we know guys don't do, right? They don't mess with another man's money. And when he said, we need you here when Le'Veon Bell was holding out, I think that probably rubbed some people in the locker room the wrong way. Now let's put on top of it, you had the anthem debacle, which went every which way but right, and did not achieve the goal that I think Mike Tomlin and the rest of the team wanted it to achieve. Then you had Ben Roethlisberger come out and say, I wish that I would have been out there standing. You have Alejandro Villanueva saying he was embarrassed that he was the only one out there standing. And this is an Army Ranger coming out and saying he was embarrassed. I mean, I think that there are a lot of probably not hurt feelings, but maybe some inconsistencies going on in the locker room that might leave guys sort of scratching their head. Yes, they are off to 3-1. They play the Jags this weekend, so that might get them all back on the right track. But let's not forget, Ben Roethlisberger said, and I don't think it was lip service, that he was seriously considering retiring after last season. And I'm wondering if they don't make it like Super Bowl or bust at this point, I wonder if this is in fact his last season.
When you're talking about model organizations in sports, particularly in the NFL, the Steelers generally come up. So the turmoil, I guess, if you will, that they've been experiencing is a little surprising. Their best defense, though, is the record. It hasn't necessarily affected their play, at least when it comes to wins and losses thus far. Now, Antonio Brown is someone that most people are going to be starting in their fantasy lineups, yeah. I'm sure. But what about some of the other players on your roster? Here is Corey Parson, the fantasy exec, with the starts and sits for the week. Welcome to SI Now's Fantasy Stardom and Situm. I'm Robin Lundberg, joined by the fantasy exec, Corey Parson, sporting the Yankees cap.
Yeah, no doubt. Yankees, you know, back in October in the Bronx. We can do that this year.
So let's first start with Corey's executive decisions with the starts.
Now, before we get into that, this is where time starts to get hairy because, of course, you got the bye weeks. So you got the Atlanta Falcons, the Denver Broncos, the Saints, and the D.C. football team on bye this week. So it's going to make some of these lineup decisions a little bit hairier. Now, a lot of players have been underperforming so far this season. So I got some guys that you may want to put on your bench because, let me tell you, a couple weeks ago, I was so upset with Jimmy Graham. I was about to cut Jimmy Graham and pick up Luke Wilson. But calmer heads prevail. Melvin Gordon owners, I know it's been tough these past couple of weeks, but you got to start Melvin Gordon this week against the New York Giants. Listen, the Giants' run defense is allowing over 140 yards a game, and opposing running backs are averaging close to 5 yards a carry. Even though Gordon has been a disappointment the past 2 weeks, I think Gordon, as he gets healthier from that bone bruise on his knee, he'll get some more work. Got a good matchup this week, catching passes out the backfield, so get Melvin Gordon back in your starting lineup. I know you don't want to, because last Sunday night you were like, I'm benching this guy. Brandon Cooks, for the most part, listen, he had that 1 or 2 good games so far this season, but the past couple of weeks, Brandon Cooks has been letting his fantasy owners down. This week, Thursday Night Football, the Bucks and the Patriots, fantasy fireworks. Play everybody in this game, including Brandon Cooks. Listen, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' pass defense been scored on 6 times so far this year, giving up 315 yards a game. But Brandon Cooks, everybody in that game, get him in your lineup.
And your final start?
Final start for this week is Tyreek Hill. Been kind of a disappointment also, but he'll get on track this weekend versus the Texans. Listen, I understand it gets difficult when you draft these guys early. You have expectations for them, but always start your studs, even when they disappoint you sometimes.
On the other end of that, who are you sitting down? Executive decisions on who to sit.
Some of the guys, not some of your best players. Andy Dalton, listen, in the last 2 games, he's thrown 6 touchdown passes. We love that. But that Buffalo Bills defense, all of a sudden, Rex Ryan leaves, and guess what? It gets better. How about that? So you got the Buffalo Bills defense, who's really only allowed 1 passing touchdown on the season. So they've also picked off 6 passes. Andy Dalton will probably throw a pick or 2 this week. I would sit Andy Dalton. Another player that we talked about him growing on me, Amir Abdullah. You know what? You got to sit him this week. The Panthers' run defense is tough. They're only allowing opposing running backs 87 yards a game to opposing rushing attacks. So Amir Abdullah, as good as he's been, I know we got bye week situations and issues, but I would try to put Amir Abdullah on my bench this week because I think it's going to be tough sledding versus that Panthers D. Finally, Latavius Murray's a bum. Like, he has a degenerative ankle, so that's going to be a problem. If you haven't gone to the wire yet, what I would do is I would get Jerick McKinnon, because McKinnon's going to take this whole job, because Murray's already came out and said, listen, I got an ankle injury. Don't expect much from me. But this week, Lat Murray going up against the Bears run defense, opposing running backs are averaging like 3.5 yards a carry. Latavius Murray is a 3.5 yards a carry guy. You know what I'm saying?
The ALDS starts this afternoon. The Red Sox and Astros, then the Yankees and Indians have the nightcap. Senior writer Ben Reiter's here to talk playoffs with us. First, a little bit, though, about last night. Maybe we can draw some maybe comparisons into what we're going to see. Diamondbacks obviously win this NL wildcard game 11-8. You had the offense absolutely on fire. Paul Goldschmidt clearly out of his funk, and they are destroying. Do you think that this offense is powerful enough to overpower the Dodgers' incredible pitching staff?
Well, look, Maggie, I picked the Diamondbacks to come out of the National League to go to the World Series.
Yeah, your picks have been pretty good, Ben.
I'm doing all right, unusually these days. But I picked it based on the offense. Obviously, the fact they went 11-8 against the Dodgers during the regular season helped. But also on a pitching staff that I thought was underrated. I'm not so sure now. The problem with last night, as exciting as the game was, is it was kind of a war of attrition, right? You don't expect to be going into a short best-of-5 series against the Dodgers without Zach Greinke available for Game 1, and also without Robbie Ray available, who might be the most underrated pitcher in all of baseball, honestly. He pitched in relief. He's not going to be available either. So starting behind the 8 ball like that against a 104-win team, it's going to be a tall task. But yes, I think the offense is coming around. The fact they scored 11 runs against the Rockies without any contributions from J.D. Martinez, who's quietly like the best hitter in the league the past few months, that says they might have even more capacity there, but they're certainly starting behind without those 2 starters.
Speaking of pitching, starters have not fared well thus far this October, accounting for just 22 outs, while relievers have registered 83. I don't think the trend will continue to that level, but do you think it will continue? And is having a good bullpen about as important as anything you can have in baseball today?
It's very important, obviously. No, I don't think that we'll see, 4 times as many innings continue to be pitched by the bullpen as by the starters. This is kind of a unique combination of the starters faltering and this one-game winner-take-all scenario in which the managers, in particular Joe Girardi, threw out all the stops to make the next round. But yes, I do think we're starting to see a trend whereby, especially in the postseason, led by Terry Francona last year, managers' hooks will be quicker on their starters. And, a lot of these teams in the postseason, in particular the Yankees, who have 5 relievers who struck out more than a dozen batters per 9 innings, They are not going to be afraid to deploy these guys at any point in the game.
Yeah, I like this stat. Starting pitchers have accounted for 22 outs, while relievers have accounted for 83.
Jeez.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a starting pitcher, though, in Max Scherzer, obviously dealing now with a hamstring injury. We know did not throw his expected bullpen session. If he is hobbled in any way, how much does it hurt the Nationals' chances?
Probably hurts them less than any other team who are facing the potential loss of a Cy Young winner. Just because when you look at the National League, I mean, top 4 ERA finishers, 3 of them were in the Nationals. So it's not just Scherzer, it's also Steven Strasburg and Gio Gonzalez. Probably have the deepest rotation. But still, look, obviously this will hurt to some degree, particularly because they've improved their bullpen, clearly from when it was a complete dumpster fire at the start of the year, adding guys like Sean Doolittle and Ryan Madson and Brandon Kinsler. But, you know, it doesn't quite work as much without that horse at the beginning of the game. I'm not saying it's a death knell if Scherzer is compromised, but it's not good.
We do have a powerhouse pitching matchup coming up. Chris Sale taking the mound against Justin Verlander. Verlander traded to the Astros in early September. He's had his postseason struggles. What are you expecting from him this postseason?
I'm expecting great things from Justin Verlander this postseason. I mean, his form has been unbelievable even before he went to Houston with 2 seconds to go before the trade deadline. As I wrote in Sports Illustrated, he's really been on his game. He seems to have been revitalized by this trade to Houston that he, of course, had to approve at the last second. But yeah, look, Houston did not trade for him for what he did in August and for what he did in September. They already had a 10.5 game lead in the AL West. That was just kind of a warm-up. They traded for Justin Verlander for today, with Chris Sale kind of being a bit up and down recently. I'm liking the Justin Verlander side of this matchup.
I really like the divergent sort of storylines that are just within the Houston Astros, where you have the young core team that came up, the one that you predicted would win the World Series in 2017, Ben, when you wrote that cover story for SI. And then you have like Verlander on the side, who's had these World Series heartbreaks in the past, and sort of on this one-man revenge tour, or at least that's how I'm seeing it. And speaking of that pick, how are you feeling about it now? Houston, are they still your pick now to win the World Series, a prediction that you made 3 years ago?
Feeling pretty good.
This is the Give You Props segment.
Yeah.
You know, Ben Reiter, the writer, couldn't have been Reiter.
Wait, is it 2017 already?
I know.
No, yeah, I think
that happened.
I picked them. I genuinely think they're as dangerous as any other team. I mean, you got to look at the Indians and the Yankees, in my opinion, as you know. I think the 3 most dangerous teams are all in the AL, but you look at Houston's lineup. There's no team as punishing as that one. They don't strike out a lot. They hit a lot of home runs. Dallas Keuchel and Justin Verlander, as good a 1-2 as there is. The X factor, Lance McCullers, who was an all-star starter this year, had some injury troubles in the second half. Now will probably be used in that relief ace shutdown role. I think he adds that team yet another dimension.
Now, obviously, the Cubs were a huge storyline narrative-wise, but so far through a couple of wildcard games, we've seen 31 runs scored. We have a ton of Cy Young pitchers going. We have a ton of young power bats. What kind of excitement level are you expecting for this year's playoffs?
This is the best group of playoff teams that I can remember. Part of that is because this was supposed to be kind of a season of parity in Major League Baseball. That did not turn out to be the case whatsoever. It is really a season of the haves and have-nots. The activity of the trade line only polarized those teams more. These are, without a doubt, the 8 best teams in baseball. 3 of them have 100 wins. You know, the Nationals almost did. The 4 others are pretty good. The 8 best teams in baseball in a winner-take-all tournament. You know, this is kind of Rob Manfred's dream. I think it's going to be a great postseason.
Okay, so you think the Astros are there in the American League. Who are they facing in the World Series, in your opinion?
I mean, I'm just going to stick with the Diamondbacks, right? I've learned not to second-guess myself, but it's going to be a lot harder without Greinke and Ray in Game 1, that's for sure.
All right, Ben Reiter, appreciate it. Playoffs start, well, the wild card's over, but the ALDS starts this afternoon. Can't wait.
Thanks, guys.
She's been called a role model, a pioneer, and a coach. Now you can call her author. Dr. Jen Welter has written a new book. It's called Play Big. Of course, Jen, the first female coach in the NFL, and so happy to have you here. Congratulations on this. And, you know, I feel like we learned a lot about you, not just the coach, but your journey to the NFL and beyond. And where I'd like you to start was when you were playing professional football for a women's tackle football league. And I'll use professional, I'm almost in quotes. You were getting paid $1 a game.
That's why I usually say pro, because we couldn't necessarily afford all those letters.
Yeah,
it's a little overkill, you know.
Describe some of the scenes from playing professional football and just sort of what you had to endure to chase this dream.
You know, what people see is, you know, they see the NFL and they assume that maybe there would be like a WNBA to go with the NBA. And the truth is the women who are playing football are doing it for the love of the game. And in there we tell a story about when we were in Long Beach, California, and we were really excited because we actually had to fly because that was pretty far. The excitement only lasted until we opened the door to our hotel room. And it was one of those things you kind of did a quick U-turn because you didn't really want to step on the carpets. It was not a great scene.
Yeah.
So our stuff is still with us. We haven't changed. We just kind of like went out to the pool to regroup a little bit. It's a beautiful day. It's California. And soon everybody starts trickling to the pool because I think everybody had the same reaction. And this guy from the front desk, he comes out and he's like screaming. He's like, ah. We have no idea what he's screaming about. Come to find out, the pool is actually where the prostitutes used to pick up their johns. So we were bad for business. And although fundraising was always an issue in women's football, that was not our style.
Yeah, no, that would make it a little bit too far.
Yeah.
It's just interesting, yes, because I think people have a certain expectation when you say professional, but you guys really were doing it just for the love of it. I think a lot of people are wondering what the future holds for even men's football because of safety concerns and things like that. Have you encountered that in terms of women's football? I mean, what could the future be?
Well, you know, women's football is still young, and it's actually growing. There are about 80 women's tackle teams across the U.S. right now, and internationally, it's a very popular sport. I was the first head coach of the Australian women's national team. They just fielded their team for the first time in the Women's World Championship this year, and they love the game. End of September, I was also in Mexico helping with some of the women's programming down there. So it is a game that's expanding, and actually, while it's people are worried about the future in the U.S. In certain ways, internationally, it's growing like never before. So I think what's really important is that now we know better, right? We know better. We know that certain things you shouldn't do. Tackling form has to be adjusted, and it is being adjusted. Safety equipment and knowledge of concussions is much better. So we as players and coaches have to be committed to preserving the game through the healthiest way possible.
Yeah. You also reveal in this book an ex-fiance who was emotionally abusive towards you. Mm-hmm. When you were going through that, what did football mean to you at that time?
Football saved my life. You know, everything else was bad, and I hadn't dated that much in my life, right? I was always so focused, and, you know, everybody's like, I wasn't the girlfriend, I was like the best friend. So I didn't have enough experience to really know, like, this isn't healthy. I just kind of felt obligated, and then you get these connections and you don't know how to get out. And the more successful I got, the worse we got. And, you know, I remember being at home, and here I am, like, I have a master's degree and I'm finishing my doctorate, and, you know, I'm one of the best football players in the world, and it would be like, you know, it's a good thing you're pretty because you got nothing else going for you. And I'd be like, And then I finally got to the point where I was like, wow, and you're not even pretty, gosh. You know, and you start to, like, see that. But all of that chaos and discomfort at home, and I'd walk on the football field, and I was magic, right? It was like I put on my pads and a helmet, and I was invincible.
To that end, you know, one of the interesting details from your book is that first polo shirt that you were wearing when you stepped onto the field with the Cardinals as the first ever woman to coach in an NFL game, in preseason game. You said it was tailored to a woman, and you said you hope that at some day gold jackets will be tailored to women. That shirt you wore, meanwhile, is in Canton right now.
Yes.
You said you hope that one day a gold jacket will be tailored for a woman. I mean, where is there another place you'd like to see women break a barrier in the NFL?
You know, I think that'll be it, and I think it'll be being those people who become staples, right? You know, coaching staffs are about adding dimensions that bring out good things in people. And that's what diversity does, right? So I don't say that I just brought being a woman, because that doesn't in and of itself make you good, right? What I brought was experience as a player, but also a doctorate of psychology, right? And so that to me was my special sauce. And it wasn't about being better than anybody or competing with them. It was hopefully we as a collective have another dimension, okay? So I think that that's a value add in every situation. And what we have to realize is, though it's not just any woman or any man for that matter, it's finding the right mix of people that will reach out and create the best situation, right? And as women and men continue to get to know each other better, right, in those trenches situations, right, where we're working together, we're grinding together, we're sweaty and gross, and, you know, all sense of, you know, that filter, decorum, like in terms of barriers, right, has gone away. And you're all a team, right? As we continue to do that, then we'll really see each other in fans.
This new book is called Play Big. Dr. Jen Welter, it's always great to see you. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Congratulations on this great book.
Thank you.